Yay, here we go. And it is such an honor to introduce our first speaker, Maru, who, as many of you know from the conversation, has received our Social Justice Award. She's with La Resistencia and Latino Advocacy. Maru?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Buenas tardes. I'm really grateful for the invitation. I think that the efforts in Tacoma are so important. Tacoma is an area that tends to be forgotten, and this idea that Seattle tends to guide everything, I think, is very misleading. So definitely very appreciative of the invitation, but also thankful for all the work you all done so far. And especially because we match in so many areas of work. And this conversation, I think, is very critical right now. If you watch the news about just the weather, it's just incredible that in one part of the country we have these blizzards, and another one we have the fires and people getting sick, right? And I think that a lot of people tend to forget that the Northwest Detention Center is part of that environmental injustice against our immigrant communities. I mean, there's no coincidence that it was built in a Superfund site, in an industrial zone, in the tide flats of the Tacoma port, where we have the LNG plant, where we have the possible travel of coal to be transported from the port to other places. I mean, it's such an symbolic area for people of color, for the Native community, for immigrants that live there daily. So I am an immigrant myself. I just recently became documented last year. I was undocumented for 25 years. So, I came here to the United States the first time when I was 21, and I used to travel back and forth between the US and Mexico. And last time I got to travel outside the country was when I was 25. So I arrived here as I was 25. And the next time I was able to travel back to my country, I was 50. So half my life in Mexico and half my life here. And it shouldn't be that way, right? People shouldn't wait that long to be able to travel back to their countries. So borders themselves are also part of this environmental justice. And so for us, it's very important as immigrants to recognize not only the immigration enforcement system as a system of terror against our communities, as a system of control against our communities, but also we need to recognize the reasons why we are forced to migrate in the first place. Today and yesterday, there were actions in Europe from several Black communities, African communities, against different bills, especially in the UK, to limit even further the access for people to get into the country. So why am I mentioning that? Because it is very clear that this is not only a problem for the US, it is an international problem, right? So the global North, through colonization, took over our land, including the US, took over our resources, committed genocide against our peoples, took away our languages, our cultures, right? They tried to take everything away from us, and they still trying to do that today. And we see it through that kind of legislation, that not only here, but in other countries, they still want to limit our access. First, they take away everything from us. And when we're forced to migrate, they want to also limit our access. So I saw this tweet from the All African Women group in the UK that said, "We came back for what you owe us." And I really liked it because it reminded me of another quote from a very famous Indian activist in the UK that said, "We are the creditors. We came back from what you took from us." So with that sense, I want to start this conversation with you all, because when we're forced to migrate, people think of immigrants, refugees, asylees as these poor people that need safety, you know, they're victims. Oh, poor them, let's open the door and be their saviors. And I want to push back on that because I think we need to be seen as the creditors. We came for what it belonged to us. So it's different when you see migration that way versus just a victimization, because we're victims, yes, definitely. But we're also in resistance and we're warriors. And I think that's very critical to join the environmental justice movement. Because when we talk about Mother Earth, this is nothing new to our communities. I came from Mexico and I'm from Mexico City. And even in Mexico City, you know, huge city, one of the biggest ones in the world, we recognize the land and Mother Earth as the most important thing to protect. And if you don't protect the most basic of our living, then you don't protect anything. When you permit the rape of Mother Earth, that's why you permit the mistreatment of human beings. And that's why in the immigration movement, many of us have called for not citizenship for us as immigrants until the citizenship of Black and Native communities is recognized. Because there's nothing good about us getting citizenship if Black people get killed and Native people get separated from their lands. So what kind of citizenship are we talking about? So that's something that we have pushed in the immigration movement, recognize why we're getting forced to migrate, see ourselves as the creditors, and also recognizing that our fight is linked to those that are already here or were forced to be here. And we cannot just ask for citizenship as the solution to these problems, because many people will continue migrating. When I was in Mexico City recently, I learned that the vast majority of migrants that are coming from South and Central America are actually Haitians. So Haitians are traveling to South America for many years already because it was easier for them to find jobs there. So Haitians don't really intend to get to the US. They just want to get to any place that they can actually survive because of the terrible situation in Haiti. And so because of Black anti-Blackness, they have been pushed from country to country to the point that they have reached Mexico. And in Mexico City, the biggest population that is staying in Mexico City is Haitian. And their children don't speak Haitian Creole. They speak Spanish because they were born in Argentina, in Bolivia, in Paraguay, in Chile, but they're continuously forced to migrate. So this idea when people arrive in the US, don't think that it's just, oh, the US is the greatest country in the world and here I come to save myself from everything else. No, people are continuously pushed because of anti-Blackness throughout our country and because of environmental injustice. In our continent, there's constant fight against mining companies, especially from Canada. And in Mexico, there's registered the biggest resistance against mining than any other part in the entire continent. So that's why people, for one, you have anti-Blackness really established in the entire continent, but then you also have environmental injustice that keeps pushing people, all sorts of people, to migrate from their homelands. And that's why we need to see the fight of migrants very interlinked to environmental justice, because we will continue migrating. Just think about, you know, people here in the US, people that used to see California as the paradise are fleeing California because of fires, or people that lived in very wealthy New York are deciding also to move to other places because of hurricanes and floods, etc. So I think that all of these need to be seen together and understood together if we're able to push further in all of our fights. Everything is interconnected. I totally agree with that. In my own history of coming to the US, I came because of NAFTA. the famous NAFTA that is no more, but it's still there. I laugh when people say, no, NAFTA is no more. And I'm like, but the consequences of it, we're still living with it. So I was one of many that have no job, that saw the political consequences in our country of having the US and Canada having even more power in our countries, coming in and deciding, you know, the prices of corn, the prices of beans, our communities and used to do crafts with natural resources, and then you have, you know, Chinese products coming in. How can you compete with that? So even historical arts and crafts are done with. They don't exist anymore. When I went back, I was looking for specific things that I wanted to buy to bring back, because, you know, 25 years without being in my country, I was like, I'm going to buy 25 years of not having access to my things, you know, my Mexican so dearly arts and crafts, and I couldn't find many. I couldn't, but I could find a lot of Chinese things that said Mexico. You know, it was incredible. I was like, I'm used to going to Chicago and you buy like a magnet for the fridge or things like that, and you turn it around, it says made in China. They're like, okay, well, but I couldn't believe that even in Mexico, the things that seem to be traditional, now they say made in China. So we'll still live with the results of NAFTA. And so I was one of the millions of people that were forced to come to the US, and then forced through policy in the US to keep us here. So here's the thing. The US says, oh, you have no papers, we don't want you here. Yet they created policies that kept us stuck in the US, which means if you're undocumented and you're here for a certain time and you travel back to your country, want to come back, and they find out you weren't documented, you're barred from coming in for 10 years. So that's why many of us had to stay. We couldn't leave anymore. Because we're like, if I go back and I want to try to be here, they're not going to allow me to be here. Therefore, we have this intentional creation of millions of us stuck in the US. Make the connection between the US involvement in Central America during the Reagan administration in destabilizing the country and the immigration right now. Yes.
Maru, I'm sorry. This is for after. I don't want to interrupt your presentation. This is for after.
Oh, for after. Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Yes. No. Yes. And I will definitely address that. Thank you. I'm always checking the chat. I'm just used to. But yeah. So what we see is that why do we have these big Canadian mining companies throughout the continent? Well, because of NAFTA. You know, they started in Mexico and they just advanced through other treaties in other parts of the continent. So to close, do I still have time? Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. So I wanted to say that our fight at the detention center is to shut down the detention center. We don't believe in having people detained. We don't believe in deporting anyone. That is not a solution to any problem. The problem was manufactured by the US in the first place. Now they're trying to sell this idea that, okay, we won't detain people, but we will have them under electronic surveillance. So right now, there's not many people in detention. It's true. So for example, in the detention center, we have 267 people detained. The detention center capacity is for 2,000 people. So that's great, right? That we have less and less people. The perfect number is 0. Yet at national level, we have over 130,000 people checking in with ICE through apps in their phones, which means they're not detained, yet they're constantly surveyed through private companies about their location and who they are with. Those apps in their phones tracks their location 24/7. So it's very scary to think that, well, you're not detained yet. They know exactly who you are and who you're with. And you have to send photos of where you're at. They have your voice data and your facial recognition data. So it's incredible now that the Biden administration is saying, oh no, we're not detaining that many people, but they're giving contracts, billions of dollars in contracts to develop more surveillance technology, to keep more people surveilled on a system that is supposedly not a punishment and is civil system, supposed to be not penal system, right? A criminal system. So why do we need all these companies selling all these softwares? Well, they make billions of dollars, and they're moving into cryptocurrency. And cryptocurrency needs a lot of energy to run 24/7 computers, which is part of what's going on in Central America with El Salvador. El Salvador decided to run their economy with cryptocurrency and use their volcanoes to power their computers. And they're selling this new economy to all these software companies and other countries. It's just I mean, yeah, it's just incredible to think how we as immigrants can be used to make profit at even those like sci-fi level, right? Like, who would think that we're not only labor, we're not only products in detention, now we're products outside detention under ICE custody. We're tied to the global economy through surveillance, electronic surveillance, and software surveillance. So all of these that might seem not harmful, it is tied still to the rape of our Mother Earth through cryptocurrency, through these software companies that don't need any more money, yet they want to make more money, such as Amazon, Palantir. There's so many companies right now making enough money of our detention and the surveillance of us. So at the NWDC, we have several campaigns. As you all know, we passed HB 1090 last year, and it's a law that prohibits private prisons and detention centers for adults for profit. We hope to shut down the detention center early. We continue fighting for that. But while we're fighting for that, we want to also make sure that people get released. So we have a lot of campaigns to free people. So right now we have one for Christian. And later in the chat, I'll put a petition that we have, signatures to ask for his release. May 1st, we're gonna have an action. We haven't publicized it yet, but this is the first scoop for you all. May 1st at 1 p.m., we will be outside the detention center calling for immigrant rights and workers' rights, because people in detention do work. GEO is refusing to pay them the minimum wage, but we want the state to recognize them as workers. And we're planning a big action for summer, sometime in July or August, where we would like you all to work with us in an environmental justice action at the detention center, to call against the detention center, to ask for the shutdown, but also to ask for the shutdown of the LNG and for any other harmful thing that is happening at the port that impact absolutely everyone in Tacoma and in Pierce County. So that's basically what I wanted to end with, was these upcoming actions that we're going to have. And I'll just put in the chat the petition for Christian, which we would like you all to sign. He's one of our leaders that was recently detained, and we believe he was detained because of retaliation, because of participating with us as member of La Resistencia. And just to acknowledge again the Puyallup tribe and native peoples, we believe that once we shut down the detention center, that land should be given back to the Puyallup to decide what to do with it, because it's theirs and they should be the ones deciding what should happen to that piece of land. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maru. And you know, several of us at the conversation and on this call have been right at those rallies outside the detention center in support of those people who are detained there. And I appreciate all that you've shared and the action you want us to take. We'll be sure to continue to share it. And then Marquise, Marquise, I think almost everybody in Tacoma knows Marquise because he's all over the place, and he has been part of the Sunrise Movement I think actually, Marquise, you said that you've aged out at 25, but anyway, so part of the Sunrise Movement, part of citizen communities for Healthy Bay, and now really working hard on the Tacoma Green New Deal. So could you tell us some about it? And then also, Janelle, could you make him a co-host, or Dexter, because I think he has some slides.
Yeah, co-host would be great. Thank you, Barb.
Mhm.
I just want to say, yeah, Maru, you're such a wealth of knowledge. It's hearing about all the intersections and interconnections is so refreshing, even though sometimes they're really daunting. Just like hearing all about that, I think really inspires me to become a smarter person. So thank you. I'm going to jump to screen share once I'm co-host, and I don't know if I'm quite co-host yet. Let me double check. Okay, now I am. Oh, I'm the host. Ooh, fancy. Okay, so let me open up my slides and we'll jump on in. Okay, let's see. Bada bing, bada boom. All righty. Can folks see that? Perfect. Okay. All righty. So everybody, my name is Marquise King Mason. I use he, him pronouns. Like Barb mentioned, I'm 25, and I do joke that I'm aging out of Sunrise. 25 for Sunrise is like 40 in Sunrise years, so not there's nothing wrong with being 40. But I'm kind of getting it to the age, so I am kind of tapering off my involvement, but I was born and raised with Sunrise, and I love the movement. So yeah, thanks all for welcoming me today. I want to talk about the Tacoma Green New Deal, which is one of the new projects of Communities for Healthy Bay, and as has been mentioned prior, was kind of the brainchild of Sunrise Tacoma. And so I kind of want to take y'all through it and what we're pushing for and what are some of our strategies and how we're trying to lean into the intersections of all these different fights going on and how we can kind of mobilize for the protection of Tacoma that we love. So the members of the Tacoma Green New Deal Coalition are Communities for Healthy Bay, Sunrise Tacoma, 350 Tacoma, Tacoma DSA. We're getting support from WEC. We're in conversations with other folks to get them signed on. I'd love the conversation sign on one day. And yeah, that's kind of that's the initial coalition, and we're building out as we go. So let's jump on into it. So this is mostly about the Tacoma Green New Deal, but I want to give a little bit of this kind of setting the stage of why we need this action. And I'm sure nobody needs reminding, but it's always good to kind of contextualize the really important work we're doing around the environment. So yeah, global fossil fuel consumption, obviously we know has, it was actually peaking at its increasing in the late 80s up until about 2010 or so. And so the rate of fossil fuel growth is slowing, but it's still growth in the net terms, which is, at odds with our climate. We know that we have like less than a decade to do the bulk of infrastructure investments and policy setting to make sure that we can hit net zero before 2050. I'm a strong believer in, I think the most appropriate term to use would probably be like advanced economies. Advanced economies like United States, like a lot of European economies. We need to hit net zero before 2050 so that some economies that are developing have a little bit of wiggle room, because we know that if the US is hitting net zero right at 2050, then other large polluting countries who are trying to get their economy under wraps in terms of fossil fuel consumption are going to be after that. Then we know that we're overshooting, and that basically increases our risk of ecological collapse even more than it already is, which is pretty dire at the moment. So yeah, I really quickly want to show a video on the IPCC report. So I'm sure folks have kind of been picking up on this, but the IPCC report was done in 3 parts. And so it's kind of pieces of it are coming out. I think the last one just came out a couple weeks ago. And so I kind of want to I thought this video was like a good review of kind of just what we're looking at in terms of climate change at the global level before we talk about the Green New Deal. So I think the audio should share. Maybe I can get some thumbs up if the audio shares. Cool.
A new IPCC report claims that there are realistic options in all sectors to cut down emissions by half by 2030. The IPCC's working group third report, Climate Change 2022, between 2010 and 2019, but the rate of growth of these emissions has slowed down. The report also suggested that since 2010, there have been sustained decreases of up to 85% in the costs of solar and wind energy and batteries. This, along with an increasing range of policies and laws, have enhanced energy efficiency, reduced rates of deforestation, and accelerated the use of renewable energy. We are at a crossroads. The decisions we make now can secure a livable future. We have the tools and know-how required to limit warming. The report says that cities and other urban areas also offer significant opportunities for emissions reductions through electrification of transport and enhanced carbon uptake and storage using nature. Reducing emissions in industries such as steel, building materials, and chemicals should be taken up as a priority as they account for about a quarter of global emissions. According to the report, limiting global warming to around 1.5 degrees Celsius requires global greenhouse gas emissions to peak before 2025 and reduce by 43% by 2030. The report also underlines that even in the best case scenario, it is almost inevitable that we will temporarily exceed this temperature threshold, but could return to below it by the end of the century. However, this relies on a clear and stronger alignment of public sector finance and policies.
All right, so I feel like that gives good context, and I think my screen is frozen. So, okay, actually, we're good. Okay. It scared me for a second. I was like, is this gonna glitch out on me? Okay. So, as you heard in that report, there are some, things are turning around. But we are basically on track to slightly surpass 1.5 degrees warming by or around 2040. And so, there's five emissions projected scenarios that the IPCC report was looking at. So we're kind of right between the fourth and the fifth track, which puts us at around like 3 degrees warming, which would be catastrophic. But the good news is that if we took all of the policies that have been passed globally, by different countries, and if we actually reach those metrics, that number decreases closer to 2. So we are making strides. We're making monumental strides. But like that video also highlighted, emissions won't peak for emissions will not start slowing or like completely hit their plateau of peaking for another 2 years. So that's kind of the context that we're fighting in. Every extra year that we go past 1.5 degrees warming will be catastrophic around mid-century. And so the work we do now and in Tacoma has an impact on the global fossil fuel chain. I think a lot of folks kind of understand this maybe implicitly, but Tacoma is a major link in the global fossil fuel chain. Tacoma has one of the deepest water ports north of California, and so we are a huge shipping terminal, as a lot of folks are familiar with. We provide a lot of the retail supplies for like states like Alaska, and we ship a lot of fossil fuels to the east as well. So yeah, so climate change is not just a global issue. I think everyone understands that. That just affects coastlines. It's affecting all of us in a myriad of ways, especially in Tacoma. Here's our beautiful tide flats. Fortunately, it's not how it looked 150 years ago, before a lot of colonization in Tacoma was ramping up and becoming industrial. But it is a cherished part of Tacoma, and we should do everything we can to protect it. And so part of the Tacoma Green New Deal is focusing on that. Alrighty. Okay, so why we need Tacoma Green New Deal? Let's actually talk about the Green New Deal. So, I'm going to share some slides really quick that come from the City of Tacoma's Office of Environmental Policy and Sustainability, kind of just about what are the local impacts of climate change and then why we need a Green New Deal. So our climate is warming, as we all know. If we basically at the current rate, we will overshoot probably 4 degrees warming in the local area, depending on the emission scenarios, and that will be catastrophic for our local climate. But obviously, like that video mentioned, by the end of the century, we can get back to where we were, as we came into the new millennia. So we're gonna likely experience more very hot days. So these are days that are considered like a deep heat. And so I'm sure folks know what a deep heat feels like, but it's those days where it's prolonged above 90 degrees for about 3 days or more. I know everyone remembers the insane heat that we've experienced last July. So that those the prevalence of heat syndromes like that and heat domes like that will increase by 6-7%, which is honestly scary if we're being honest. You know, I love the heat. A bunch of my family lives in Phoenix, so you know, 90 degrees every blue moon is kind of fun. But I remember I was when we had the last heat dome, I was staying up at my best friend's house in Seattle, and I remember I woke up and, you know, we'd been out drinking that night before. I woke up and inside the house, it was like 110. And I was like, I woke up and I was like, oh my God, like I cannot exist. And I came home and luckily like my house was like way cooler. But it is scary for a lot of folks who are unhoused or who have, you know, don't have air conditioning. Like my house just got air conditioning this year because we wanted to avoid that. And that's a privilege that not a lot of folks have, especially in Washington, where we're not necessarily used to this deep heat and extreme heat. Also, folks, looks like some folks are in the waiting room. So I'm going to let them all in. Looks like it's Marilyn Kimling and Desiree. I'm going to make somebody else co-host real quick so that I don't miss letting people in again. So let me really quickly make sure that someone else is co-host. I'm going to make Barb co-host so she can let people in. Oh, there's only...
Yes, Marky, I think you should just keep going.
Yeah, we can't make people co-host. Okay, apologies. I will just try to keep an eye on the waiting room then. Usually there's a co-host function, but I guess not. Okay, so back into it. So we're going to look at 38% less reduced snowpack. So you can kind of see in this image, the yellow line on the left is where the snowpack generally goes about down to on Mount Tacoma. This is a photo of 2014. So obviously we have warmed since then, and this was how low the snowpack got in the spring. And so it's really important for our snowpack to last over the summer, which I think we'll get into more in a little bit. And so that is not good. Higher winter stream flow. So this is impacted by our snowpack. So, you know, the water that's coming down comes down faster and it comes down sooner over the late summer. And then it kind of ramps back up over basically the winter, where we're seeing a lot of flooding. We know flooding and mudslides are becoming a kind of fact of life. I mean, they've always been a thing in Washington, but they're definitely increasing, especially in outer Pierce County. So we have lower summer stream flow, and that's because a lot of our water is running off because it's getting hotter over the summer. And so that, you know, we rely on a lot of stream flow to keep, you know, for our quality of life in a lot of different areas in Washington. And so that decreasing by 23% is going to be detrimental to a lot of the things we know and love, especially like salmon. We're looking at about 50% probability of 1 foot sea level rise, but we could see up to multiple feet, although the probability of that's lower, it's at like a couple percent, but that is a new reality. And obviously the city and the county had to make accommodations to that. And we have to, you know, put in parks that are made to overflow, which cost millions of dollars. And so, you know, that's a huge impact to our way of life as well. And so, yeah, and kind of just in summary, we're close to locking in about 2.7 degrees warming. I think that number comes from if we take all of the climate commitments and we actually like act on them, and we actually do the decreases necessary. And so it kind of shows we still have a long ways to go. Obviously, the United States, you know, getting its act together will bring that number down, but it is still a global fight, and we are interconnected to our brothers and sisters abroad. Alrighty, so, but a better world is possible. We know it, we feel it, we see it every day. We know we're making large strides even at the federal level. You know, obviously we're not getting everything that we want, thanks to folks like Joe mentioned, but we are making some progress at that level. But our advocacy is really important, and so that's why I'm really excited to be part of a national movement, even though our work is hyper focused in Tacoma. And so, you know, the Tacoma Green New Deal is our chance to transform Tacoma at the scale needed, like from the grassroots up, to avert climate ruin. And it's a once in a generation chance to make a down payment on programs and infrastructure that will serve us for generations, just like the New Deal did in the 40s, going all the way up through really the 60s. You know, we had a lot of New Deal programs that were really successful in transforming the quality of life for a lot of Americans after World War II and the Great Depression, which was, you know, some of the darkest days in American history. And so, you know, we've seen it before. We've seen what happens when, you know, the president, labor unions, justice advocates, everyone's on the same page about transforming a better world. And so we think the Green New Deal is that vision, and we want to bring that vision to Tacoma. Alrighty, so here's some of the policies of the Tacoma Green New Deal. I know there's a lot, so I'm just going to try to rattle them off real quick. I'm sure folks have heard some of these in passing already, but so there's basically 3 buckets of the Tacoma Green New Deal. There's environmental justice for all, there's a just transition off of fossil fuels, and there is good green jobs. And so those are the kind of 3 buckets that we're kind of thinking of as we push for the policy platform and hopefully a resolution. is these are kind of our guiding stars in each of the areas, and these are kind of how we talk about the Tacoma Green New Deal. So the first one is EJ for all, and that's one of the first provisions that is 100% clean electricity by 2028. So we're most of the way there. I think we're about somewhere near like 92% or 93% clean energy from TPU, but a bit of that is obviously dirty, and so the city has to basically renegotiate their contract with Bonneville Power, and so we want to make sure that the power that we are getting is 100% clean. We also want to make sure that we're studying the ethical sourcing of our energy, because we do know that hydropower is a great asset, but it's also can be very detrimental to our salmon and our fish populations. And so making sure that we're looking into how to move forward in a way that we're still reducing our emissions and moving to clean energy without perpetuating some of that organism loss. We make sure we have fair food transit by 2024. We want the city to create a climate justice task force to make sure that we're centering folks who are directly impacted by climate change and a lot of the decision making that happens at the city level. We want to increase environmental education, recognizing that a lot of folks, like when we have heat domes and when we have inclement weather, don't always know all the necessary precautions and steps to take, because a lot of folks turn to the health department if they know to turn to the health department, but we want to make sure that that is actually meeting people where they're at. We want to center Indigenous voices in restoring Puget Sound salmon and making sure that the city is doing more to help with our surface water runoff and some of our mitigation efforts to make sure that we are doing our part. As I think most of us on this call are obviously settlers to this land, and so we have to make sure that we are working in unison with our Indigenous neighbors. I think we already spoken to that, and we also need to make sure the city of Tacoma is accountable in that as well. We also want to expand food and make sure that more folks are getting food, that we have a decentralized network for getting folks fed. So just transition off fossil fuels is kind of how we think about how we make sure that we take care of folks when we're transitioning off of fossil fuels. So we obviously want to reduce the pollution and harm that folks are facing, but we also want to make sure we take care of workers. They're not our enemies in this fight. And so folks a lot of these industries are going to be potentially dying anyways, if we're talking about the fossil fuel industry. So we want to make sure that we're catching people as they fall out of those dying industries. So we want to make sure that we have net zero carbon emissions by 2040, or at least before 2050. Obviously 2040 is quite bold, but we think we have the tools in our toolbox, and we have a lot of great stuff at the state level. And so it's time for the city to use all of the tools in its toolbox to get us as close to net zero before 2050 as possible. We want to get fracked gas out of homes. A meta-analysis that was done by Oxford showed that children who are raised in homes with a gas stove are 43% more likely to experience asthma-related symptoms over their life, and they're about 25% more likely to actually be diagnosed with asthma. So that is a huge health disparity. And a lot of folks like gas stoves. My roommate brought home a gas stove one day, and I was like, what's going on? And so we put in a gas stove for like a week, and I was not happy about it, let me tell you. But we had a gas stove for like a week, and that whole week I was having headaches. Like I could smell it. Like it is a real impact to our health, even if some folks prefer gas cooking. And so we want to get fracked gas of all types out of our homes as quickly as possible. We want to establish a just transition fund to make sure that we are actually we have contingencies and dollars to help workers falling out of dying industries. We want to make sure Tacoma is serving thousands of residents with community solar by 2030. And then we also want to protect the Tacoma tide flats, which is kind of our how we're organizing around the sub-area plan, which I'll talk about a lot more in a little bit. Good green jobs are our last bucket. And we want to make sure that we are providing good jobs to pay a living wage to as many people as possible when we're transitioning to a green economy. And so we want to retrofit every home that needs it by 2035. We want to establish the Tacoma Green Jobs Corps. So partnering with labor unions and folks like Workforce Central and other folks to make sure that we can set up a Green Jobs Corps to give people the skills needed to both restore our communities and to avert climate ruin. I'm going to let somebody in who's in the waiting room. Okay. We want to build 50,000 more affordable housing units by 2040. I'm sorry, most of these you're supposed to have the dates on them, but I must have taken some off by accident. We want to build 50,000 more affordable housing units by 2040. That's in line with some of our growth projections for Tacoma. We want to make sure that renters are protected, and our partners at Tacoma DSA are leading a lot of that work. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then finally, our last good green jobs tenet is we want to increase tree canopy in Tacoma and make sure we plant. We're aiming to plant 5,000 more trees than already planned for, which is already thousands, to make sure that we are reducing the impacts of urban heat islands, which basically is a concept where a lot of cities and urban areas are they're paved and concrete gets really hot, and there's a lot of built environment that holds a lot of heat. And so urban areas are like several degrees warmer than nearby, like more rural areas, because of urban heat islands. And so trees are a great tool to help reduce that. Okay, so let's talk about the priorities of the Tacoma Green New Deal. So we kind of have three main goals for, is my screen cut off? Interesting. I feel like it wasn't last time I shared, but I guess you can't see the last one, but I'll talk y'all through it anyway. So we want to make sure that our three main goals are: we want to ensure that Home in Tacoma prioritizes density, transit-oriented development, bans fracked gas in new homes, and allows everyone to afford living in Tacoma. We also want to pass the Tidal Flats sub-area plan that will invest in clean fuels, attract green manufacturers, and restore ecosystems in and around Commencement Bay. We're going to talk more about these later. So I know they're vague now, but we'll jump into that. And then the last one that's a little bit cut off on my screen is we want to pass the Tacoma Green New Deal resolution. We think we can get a lot of great stuff in these two other advocacy fights, with Home in Tacoma Phase 2 and with the Tidal Flats sub-area plan. But we know that some of the work's going to be left to pick up, and so we want to make sure that a Tacoma Green New Deal resolution is also passed. So let's kind of talk about the three areas that we're focusing on. So for Home in Tacoma, we want to make sure that Tacoma will be properly zoned to be transit oriented. So we want to make sure that communities have access to transit options and they're dense. We want to make sure that communities are interconnected. So no more having major traffic corridors cutting communities off. And we want to make sure that we have communities that are walkable. And then Tacoma will also truly protect renters and mandate truly affordable housing if we are successful. So Phase 2 of Home in Tacoma is going on right now. And so the city did a big rezone, or not a substantial rezone in Phase 1. And so, but that work is unfinished. And so it did increase some density in some core areas. And then, like I think multi-family units, like up to, I think 4 units, are like allowed across the entire city. But that helps, but that's not going to do a lot of the other work we need to do. So we both need to rezone, and then we also need to make sure that we're doing other stuff like getting gas out of homes, like mentioned. And so another area is the sub-area plan. So I think a lot of folks are familiar with the Tidal Flats regulations that we were able to strengthen and pass and make permanent in the fall. They're good. They're a step in the right direction, but they are not perfect. And so the bulk of our efforts is now focused on making sure that the sub-area plan is as prosperous and progressive as possible. We want to make sure that Tacoma will usher in green businesses. We want to make sure that we're prioritizing developing clean fuels in the Tidal Flats. A lot of that work is relegated to industries to develop clean fuels, which obviously makes sense because they're the ones who are, creating fuels, but we need to make sure that the city has a more active role in that. We also want to make sure, and we have the proper business environment to incentivize that, and the proper, bans on industries that we don't want to see. We also want to make sure that we restore Commencement Bay. And so right now the sub-area plan is doing their EIS scoping process. So that is going to kick off very soon, and that's going to be a very engaging process. So I can always come back in a month or two to give folks an update, but we want to make sure that one of the tenets of our Green New Deal is organizing around the sub-area plan to make sure that we get a lot of the important investments, important regional collaboration that we need now to set us up for good growth in the future. Hopefully Home in Tacoma, will help with our housing density, and then the sub-area plan will help with our economic growth. And then it's on to passing a Tacoma Green New Deal resolution. So we know that, some of the provisions that will pass in those other policies just wouldn't really make sense. Some of the stuff in the Tacoma Green New Deal just won't come out of those two other buckets. So we want to make sure that it's wrapped up in a neat little bow with the Tacoma Green New Deal resolution. And we have some good support from council. We have 4 council members who have signed on to it, and we think we can get some even more people signed into it, and so to pass something. And so we have a lot of other work to do, but we think, or they have a lot of other work to do, but we think the Tacoma Green New Deal makes sense because it is combining all these disparate fights and efforts into kind of one thing to make sure that we are truly transforming Tacoma in a number of ways. That's not just climate, but the quality of life that a lot of people experience. Alrighty, so getting in the fight for a Tacoma Green New Deal, I'm going to give you all some resources. I can't drop anything in the chat right now just because I am screen sharing, but as soon as I'm done, I'm going to drop a bunch of stuff in the chat for y'all so that you have resources. Okay, so Home in Tacoma Phase. So this is our kind of timeline to win. Home in Tacoma Phase 2, that should be wrapping up by the end of the year. The sub-area plan timeline, that should be wrapping up by the beginning of next year, hopefully. Fingers crossed. It's been, what has it been like? I think the whole process will have been 6 years. So quite long, but we're getting there. And then again, we want the city council to pass Tacoma Green New Deal resolution in 2022 or 2023 or whenever we can get the critical mass to do that. Alrighty, so the last little piece I want to talk about substantively is how winning a Tacoma Green New Deal and the money it will take to do that. So a lot of folks, I think the number one thing we always hear is how we pay for that. Well, we know that the United States is one of the richest nations in the world, if not the richest, on a lot of different metrics, depending on how you look at it. And so we have enough money to do this, and these are number one, necessary investments. Number two, they're going to save us money if we do them sooner. So, but again, we still need to make sure that we can point to dollars to fund some of this work. And so we have some really great folks at the Office of Environmental Policy and Sustainability at the City of Tacoma who've done some really, really good work at isolating federal dollars to make sure that we can invest in things like the Climate Action Plan and the Tacoma Green New Deal. So I want to thank them. But yeah, so these are some of the big buckets federally that we can tap into. So these numbers on the left are not the amount of money Tacoma would be getting. I want to be clear on that. But these are just three buckets of funding that we could tap into if we have the city and the county and TPU and all these folks working together to make sure that we're getting these dollars into Tacoma, because we know that the bipartisan infrastructure plan passed and there was some good stuff in there. And so let's use that money while it's here. So there's $1 billion nationally for this program called Strengthening Mobility and Revolutionizing Transportation. So that's increasing multimodal transit and transit investments and doing a multitude of things. So there's a big bucket for that Tacoma can tap into if we go for it. If we have staff and we have folks who are actually applying for those federal grants, which is an arduous process. Candidly, there's $2.5 billion in port infrastructure development program that would basically allow us to transition the Tide Flats area forward into the future. There's $550 million in energy efficiency community block grants that could do a lot of work around making sure that folks are living in homes that are insulated and have good air and the roofs aren't falling apart and all these things that we know that we're going to need improvements on as we transition into an unstable climate by mid-century. So so there's a couple ways y'all can keep up with our work. You can follow Communities for a Healthy Bay, 350 Tacoma, Tacoma DSA, or Sunrise Tacoma, ideally all of them on social media. And so I'll drop our social media handles. I think there's some 350 folks who can drop theirs as well. So we'll get some of those in the chat. So you can plug into a kind of a campaign focus area. That's kind of how we're thinking of it. We have the Home in Tacoma for All. That's one facet. We have Protect the Tacoma Tide Flats. That's another facet. And then there's kind of the Tacoma Green New Deal Coalition that's organizing kind of at the highest level. So you can plug into any one of those areas if those are your passions. And then you can join us to organize. So you can sign up for Communities for Healthy Bay. We have an Arising Issues advocacy list, which is a great way to keep up on a lot of the efforts that are happening, like the South Tacoma warehouse proposal and stuff like that. We try to put stuff out in a timely manner so folks can engage on those really important things that we're needed to show up at. You can join our Green New Deal advocacy training. We're thinking sometime in May, maybe, on that one. And then you can add your name and support. So you can sign our petitions, which I'll drop in the chat after this. There's a Tacoma Green New Deal petition. There's the Home in Tacoma for All petition, where some of our other Tacoma Green New Deal work's happening. And yeah, so those are, I think that's everything for me. Let's see, is this the last one? Okay, so that's all. I'll stick around for the panel and I appreciate it. I think I went a couple minutes over, so I apologize, but yeah.
Well, thank you, Marquise. There's so much to it. And thank you for sharing what you're doing action-wise, what the city's doing, and what people at home can do. So our next speaker at the conversation is Councilwoman, Puyallup Tribal Councilwoman Annette Bryant. And we're so honored to have her here because it's a busy time for her. She's rerunning for Tribal Council. And so I appreciate you being here, and go ahead, Annette.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
All right. Hawks Lahale, Ceob, De Ishad, Annette Bryan Tista, Spiala Pubchud. Good day, honorable friends and relatives. My name is Annette Bryan, and I am a very proud Puyallup Tribal member and also a member of the Puyallup Tribal Council. Prior to working on the Tribal Council, I worked for the Housing Department for 10 years, where I was able to build some LEED certified housing and got platinum certification actually. and did all kinds of green and culturally relevant housing projects. And then prior to that, I spent 10 years at the Environmental Protection Agency. So I have a Master's of Science in Civil Environmental Engineering from Tufts University, and I care very deeply about the environment. So today I am on the landing site of the Puyallup Tribe of Indians, and this is our canoe, if you can see that there. So I'm wearing my paddle vest, and we are right in the middle of the Tacoma Tide Flats, the Port of Tacoma. So we have to combine what is beautiful and what is important and sacred to us with what is very industrial and damaging. And in the far right hand side, you can see the Puget Sound Energy liquefied fracked gas plant. And then you can see our beautiful Mount Tahoma that is sacred, and it's the headwaters for all that comes down and gives us life as Puyallup people. So anyway, yeah, that's what I'm doing today. I had thought that, you know, we'd be home by now, but our canoe is taking paddlers around the sound, and we woke our canoe up today. One of the things that's extremely important to us is our culture, our ceremonies, and our traditions, which we're fighting very hard to keep and to bring back. And so one of the things we did today was we honored our canoe, and we honored the cedar log that gave us that canoe, and we blessed it and woke her up, and we took her out on the water. So that's one of the ceremonies that we do here at the landing site as Puyallup people. I was really interested in this panel, and I've been listening in for just a short while. I think that, as many of us know, and if you don't know, it's really easy to look up data and find out statistics about where pollution is usually cited. And we know that that's in places where there's people of color, where there's people of poverty, and where there's indigenous people. And at the Puyallup tribe, we're a very checkerboarded reservation. We have Pierce County, City of Tacoma, City of Fife, City of Milton, City of Federal Way, King County. All of those jurisdictions are in our reservation. And we own about 13% of the Puyallup reservation. So we're trying to buy back land that was stolen from us. Sorry, there's a surveillance thing here. But we are, you know, trying to buy back our land using our the great economic equalizer for Indian tribes, which is gaming. And it's one of the only things we can do to fund our government, to fund programs like our culture department, like our language department. We're revitalizing our language, and buy back lands that were stolen from us. Additionally, we do a lot of fighting for our salmon people and our four-legged people. One of the fights we're currently in is the liquefied fracked gas plant. We are fighting that at every level. We went to the Puget Sound Pollution Control Hearings Board, and we were able to get some conditions, put in some permits, which, I mean, the facility has lied to us all along. They built the facility, they sited the facility without meaningful consultation to the Puyallup Tribe of Indians. And we have been fighting it with our partners, a lot of you who are on this call. So I will, you know, lift my hands to you guys and really thank you and honor you for what we've been able to do together to bring attention and awareness to this area. I also sit on the elected leaders group of the sub-area planning group for the Port of Tacoma Tide Flats. And it's my personal opinion that we should never site another industrial facility on the Tacoma Tide Flats, ever. There was a little bit of discussion in the previous slideshow that talked about carrying capacity of our Mother Earth. This area that I'm sitting in right now has reached her carrying capacity. There is not room for one more pollution input in this environment. And so I'm really fighting for us to do the right thing. We have the city of Fife, Pierce County, the city of Tacoma, and the port of Tacoma who sit on that group, and trying to have meaningful dialogue where we support our economy, but at the same time protect our environment. So it has been a long process, 5 years. 5 years we've been doing this. Pandemic aside, it's it's taking a long time, but we want to do it right. It's that important. We have to do it right. So we are also fighting the Electron Dam. That owner up there put a football field full of turf on the bottom of the riverbed and let the water so up at the dam, they changed channels. So they'll stop the flow, and then they put the football turf on the ground, and then they change the flow to go over the football turf. And so now we have little pellets of pollution up and down our Puyallup River. Our fisheries people are finding pieces of turf and pellets every single day. And it's just a matter of time before we start putting them, they start being found in our fish and therefore in our bodies. So it's not good. It is not good. We are fighting environmental justice for that. I think, a couple of Citizens for Healthy Bay and another environmental group are settling for attorney's fees. Honestly, guys, the tribe is not with that. We don't think it's fair for an attorney to make a couple $100,000 and the environment gets nothing. So we are going to continue that fight, and we are going to continue to insist that they clean up the environment they damaged. Our ultimate goal is to get the dam shut down. We are a treaty tribe, so the Puyallup Tribe of Indians enjoys a treaty. We are a sovereign nation within the United States of America. We are our own fully sustained government, although we do rely on the federal government for funding for schools, healthcare, housing, and other very minimal grant programs that they have. We have our own water quality standards. We are recognized by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for treatment in the same manner as the state. So we have our own water quality standards and our own air quality standards on the reservation. And we have jurisdiction over the entire Puyallup River and its banks within the reservation boundaries. Also wanted to highlight about the reservation boundaries. There was a map that was used for the purpose of the settlement, the land claim settlement in the 80s, late 80s, that was used just for the purpose of the settlement. We understand the history of that is a surveyor went around and sort of drew around little landmarks. So you see, it's just odd the way the reservation goes around the old tide flat area. And it's not a true boundary, and it is disputed or not agreed to by the Puyallup Tribe of Indians, but we do use it for the purpose of discussion. And this tide flat sits on our ancestral homelands. The city of Tacoma sits on ancient village sites. And anytime they've done digging, they find that that is true. So we try to fight projects that will disturb those lands that our ancestors had village sites on. And one example of that is transportation, trying to put under the ground in the city of Tacoma. That just can't work because that's where our village sites are. And every time we dig there for pilings for projects, large projects, we do find relics of our ancestors. So I did not prepare a presentation or a slideshow today, but I did want to come on and support the work that you're all doing and give you a little bit of brief background in history. I also got trained as a climate reality leader during the pandemic and did a presentation there. And you can find not only all over the United States, but all over the world, that these industrial sites and sites that pollute are put on indigenous lands or lands where people of color are impacted. You could see during the pandemic that they were most impacted by health effects from the pandemic. And it's something that we all are talking about, and there's a lot of action going on around it. And I commend those people. I really, really raise my hands to those people who are fighting this fight, because it's gone on for too long. And I'm grateful that the administration changed, that we have a president who knows that climate change is real, and hope that we can get that we can stop the warming that was talked about in the previous slideshow, because it is real and it is happening right in front of our face. And I said here the other day when I spoke that if we pollute the earth where our food grows, and we pollute the water where our fish come from, if our fish die, and if the plants die that feed us, well, guess what? We die too. It's really simple. It's, it doesn't take a science degree to know that. That's common sense. And so I thank you all for being here today and look forward to our panel discussion. Puyallup, I am finished.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman Bryan. One of the things about the conversation is our slogan is where talk is action. And so how we can support you and your efforts is important to us. And if you want to, at some point, connect with us to say more about how we can support you. I know many of us have supported you here for years. And just to catch you up, because you didn't hear the first speaker, Maru, she said, as soon as the detention centers close down, then we want the land to go back to the tribe. So, yes. So we'll move on to our Q&A, and some people can write their Q&A in the chat if they want. Some of them have been. And if you go to reactions and hit that little icon at the bottom of your computer and use the raise hand icon, or hit the raise hand icon, it'll be easier for me to see who wants to ask a question. And when we ask a question, since there's so many people on, if you ask a question, just instead of doing a follow-up, we have to wait so everybody has an opportunity to ask a question if they so choose, and then we'll go to a second question. So raise your hand if you have a question. And I know Oneida did have a question right in the beginning when I was reading the chat. Do you want me to read that, Oneida, or would you like to read it?
I'm trying to find it. I hope you have it.
I do.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay. So this question was from Maru. Will you make the connection between the U.S. involvement in Central America during the Reagan administration in destabilizing their countries and the immigration now? To any of the presenters. Oh, okay. So that's another question. So, so that was your question, Oneida.
Yes. So obviously the U.S. international policy, both economic policy and really social policy, has been to, from the very get-go, right, to make America for Americans. So even the idea of taking over the entire continent. And so this is not new. We see it specifically in this question in Central America. Reagan participated actively in supporting either dictatorships or the contrast against left governments. And so obviously Central America is an example of that. We saw it in Nicaragua, we saw it in El Salvador, we saw it in Guatemala. And so, and even recently with Clinton as a Secretary of State supporting the Honduras coup. But going back to the 80s, it was very clear that there's always been the agenda of the United States to intervene in countries where they don't want a specific kind of governments that are quote unquote unfriendly to the US, right? So they decide what kind of government they want that might be friendly to their political and economical interests. But let me also add that it's also during the Reagan administration that Salvadorians get rounded up and deported from East LA back to El Salvador because they were participating in gangs. So these are not only refugees at that time, they were young people that were marginalized in a very racialized capitalistic country, that the only option for them was to refuge themselves into gangs. And we saw that also with the Cambodian population, that they couldn't deport because they were refugees, and Cambodia was still in the midst of a war, and they wouldn't take refugees back, deportees back. So what the Reagan administration did is, for El Salvador, they deported them back to El Salvador, and for Cambodians, they put them in prison. Right now, those youngsters are now adults being let out of prison, but now they're being deported to Cambodia because Cambodia is taking them. So El Salvador did take them back in the 80s. And that is the reason why gangs took so much power in El Salvador, because they came from the US. They learned the system of the gangs in the US, and then they're just sent to another country where they don't really belong anymore. And being such a corrupt country, which the US had already intervened on, it was easy for corruption to grow even more. So our countries are corrupted, yes, because of the US intervention. So if you see recently, the Kamala Harris announced that they're gonna throw more money at Central America through PepsiCo, Microsoft, Nestle. They're gonna invest, quote unquote, into these countries, right? And so what happens is that this is just money for more corrupted countries, governments. And so that's why it's so easy for these kind of gangs to take so much power, and not only economic power, but in a violent way. And so the destabilization of Central America has to do everything with the massive migration to the US by many groups till today. And also because of that corrupted system, it is easy for these big corporations to come and pollute our countries and to steal our resources and to rape Mother Earth. It happens again and again, and the 80s is a good example of that. So thank you so much, Oneida, for that question.
Thank you. So the next question, and this is to any of the presenters, reflecting back on the reality that everything is connected and that all of our systems are built on worldviews of separation and extraction, are there ways that you see that activism can include broadly transforming our cultural stories toward our oneness with nature and with nature, with each other, and our culture? So any one of you can answer that question. Marquise, Councilwoman Bryan, or Maru.
I'd be happy to start. I think that's a really good question, and everything really is connected, and it's so simple when you think about it. I always wonder what goes on at the higher levels when we think about shipping, for example, when we ship our natural resources over to China and they make things that we don't really need to ship them back to us so we can consume them. That's, a connection I think about all the time. And just getting back to our natural earth, I think activists can continue to educate. We can continue to educate our children about how important it is. Youngsters at college, or even oldsters at college, talking about our environment and why it's so important. And then talking about corporations and the global world. There was really good conversation about Nestle, for example, and Microsoft, and all the money that they put in to societies, to countries, to indigenous places, to come in and take over for profit. It's always boggled my mind, and I think we need to continue having the conversation and exposing them for what they really are, and that is, pillagers of our Mother Earth and pillagers of our natural resources and destroyers of our people. So yeah, good question. I'm not sure if I answered it, but I like that question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. Do you want a couple
Yeah, go
people
ahead.
answering this one? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if I miss parts of the question, I apologize. But I have it in front of me, so hopefully I get to it. Yeah, so I think one thing that I think environmentalists can do is, especially as kind of recognizing some of the roots of the environmental movement in the United States. Now, it hasn't always been a welcoming space for people of color, for serving frontline communities, for doing transformational anti-racist work, and we kind of have to contend with that history, and it's a very real history. There was a lot of great advocacy in the 50s, 60s, 70s around the environment, and by no means would I want to discredit that, but environmentalists have not always been on board with speaking directly about racism and sexism and all these things that are happening in our communities and society. And so I think that's one thing that as environmentalists I really try to carry with me, is that there's a lot of different things that conventionally environmentalists have sometimes shied away from, and that it's on people like me, and it's on us and the new folks coming into this work to make sure that we're recognizing that past, and we're also changing the conversations to make sure that they are centering undocumented folks and our indigenous neighbors and the groups that don't always get credit for being on the front lines of environmental progress and also climate change. So I think making sure that we are prioritizing anti-racist movements and policies and ideas and culture, I think is really important so that we have the openness with nature and each other, and that we're creating not only a stronger society, but a better society too, that is more compassionate, more focused on addressing things at the root cause, and improving the quality of life for people who will be the most impacted by climate change and often have been the least responsible for increasing emissions. So hopefully that gets to some of the question.
Thank you. Megan, you had a question in the chat. Do you want to go ahead and read it? Or do you want me to? You can unmute.
Yes, I don't even think it was a question. I think it was just I got excited when Mauro was talking and gave an example of how profit is made off of detainees. So I don't know that it needs to be discussed unless you wanted to talk more about that, Mauro.
I can always talk more about that, but I'll be very brief. I think that again, for us, for a lot of immigrant communities, we were seen for many years as very uncivilized because we talk about Mother Earth, because we talk about keeping our languages, our ways. When we move here, we're seen as not allowing ourselves to be assimilated. Why don't you speak English? Why don't you dress like us? Why don't you eat like us? Why don't you pray like us, right? And now it's kind of, it's like in fashion to be organic, right? To use herbs to cure yourselves. So even those things that have been so important for us have been appropriated by the system. And therefore, profits has always been the number one thing in capitalistic countries such as this. And that's why profiting from people's lives is still permitted. It's legal. It's legal to have detention centers still. It's legal for the detention center right now to give trash as food for people to eat. It is legal to charge them for salt. They're not giving them salt in the food anymore. Now they have to buy it from commissary because the food is so bad that just adding salt to it, it masks the flavor. So now Geo, to make more money, they're charging just for salt. They're not giving hairbrushes anymore. You have to buy a hairbrush to be there, to live there. So those kind of things are still legal. And so that's why to say the detention system is so messed up, it's also corrupt, it should end, but to also understand that they know they're losing, so they're expanding the profit by creating new systems, new ways of criminalizing us, and therefore make profit of us even when we're not detained. So that is so important for us to make people understand. These industries make profit of all of us, right? Like we know social media created ourselves as products, but when you're undocumented and when you're an immigrant, it's even worse. You have like no recourse. And that's why it's so important for us to fight against the capitalistic system that we live in, to fight against the rape of our mother nature, and to unite to recognize what are the interconnections. So I love the question, you know, how do we bring this together as we are one people and we need to fight? Yes, and we need to understand the levels of privilege that different communities have and they don't have. So obviously understanding that we are all a product to be proud for, to create profit for the capitalistic system. But when you are in detention, you have no recourse, and that should not be legal anymore. We should make sure that all detention centers are shut down, and anything that has to do with immigration enforcement custody should also be abolished.
Thank you. Melissa Knott, you have a question, or you have a question in the chat. Would you like to read it, or I could read it if you, or you can unmute.
I was just wondering, like, it was said that the Puyallup have their own air quality and water quality, and I was just wondering how that is different. Is it not different from like the surrounding, you know, government or agencies and things like that? Is it stricter or what?
Yes, thank you for the question. So we have jurisdiction over the Puyallup River and its banks and the reservation land. So that's about 13% of the reservation that we own, that we have the jurisdiction that our standards apply to. They are stricter or more stringent than state and federal standards because we have the authority to make them that way. And so they're as stringent or more stringent than what's existing in our surrounding communities. And sometimes there's a rub because there's shared waters or something upstream will impact what we're doing downstream, but it does give us a tool to keep the waters that we do have under our jurisdiction a little cleaner.
Awesome. I that's what I figured, but I just wanted to make sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Kathy Lohan, you have a question for Marquise, if you would like to unmute and ask that question. Or I can ask it for you.
I'm here. Marquise, if we did get some of that, what 1.5 billion, no, 2.5 billion port infrastructure money, will any of that go to widen and deepen the Blair for the PSC to in case they're thinking of exporting LNG? And explain the role of gas in the current war in Ukraine, and the importance of Tacoma in a global sense, given that we are a Western Coast deepwater port, and that we now have an LNG refinery in our port. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm very concerned that that money would be used for deepening and widening the Blair just for PSC.
Thanks, Kathy.
Yeah. Okay. So I am not quite an expert on the entire like jurisdiction and authority of a project like dredging, but widening and dredging. But so I guess my initial thought would be that that project is mostly carried out by the Army Corps of Engineers, and so I'm not positive what increased funding at the port would how it would directly impact to that. And with a lot of those grants, you know, since a lot of them are environmental, they would have to usually they're relatively strict in what you can and can't do. So I guess it's not quite my paramount concern with federal dollars like that, but I do always think that that's a risk. You know, Army Corps of Engineers is going through a Blair dredging process, like you mentioned right now, and so that is something that like we have to like, you know, make sure we're engaged with and fighting back with, you know, because we, you know, dredging, unfortunately, you know, because of all the contaminated soil and sediment, you know, it stirs up toxins and pollutants. You know, usually, you know, the governments and stuff will say that like you can mitigate from some of that, but it's really hard with pollution that's so deeply entrenched into the soil and into the land and the water. And so it's always definitely a big concern for sure. I'm just generally there for like modernization of some of the port stuff to reduce like traffic congestion and stuff like that. So hopefully we can if folks like us and folks that are in this room are kind of shepherding these conversations and spearheading it, we can make sure that, they're not just replicating the same old systems, like, dredging and widening. But I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer for you, Kathy, but I definitely something to think about, and I'll make sure to connect with our staff community to talk through important things like that, because, we do want to make sure that we're not, there's not unintended consequences to trying to do important and good work, So, and then explain the role of gas in the war in Ukraine and the importance of Tacoma in this conflict. A little bit out of my depth of expertise as well, but I'll give it my best. So in the United States, to my understanding, we export a type of, so I'm going to jump into oil, which is what I know, and then we can maybe work our way around to gas. We export a type of oil that I want to say is there's like sour oil and like sweet oil. That's not the most scientific term, but I think that's kind of the lay terms. And so what happens is we have, I want to say with the 70s, like oil crisis, like, energy crisis that happened, a lot of folks who are a bit older than me, remember, and it was a time when we had huge inflation. I want to say because the ramifications of that were like a bunch of fossil fuel infrastructure switched from refining one to another, basically to refine a different type of oil. And so I think our refining capacity is a different type of oil than we export. And so so we're very dependent on, to my understanding, we're very dependent on the East and Eastern countries, to the east of Europe, for some of that, for basically getting the type of fossil fuels that we need that we can actually refine in the United States. I'm not an expert on this, so it's probably not gonna be the most satisfactory answer, but so our dependence is very visceral in energy. And so you might have heard the Biden administration is temporarily digging into some of our oil reserves, and so to reduce the cost of inflation and yada yada yada. And I'm sure we all have opinions on that, but that we're still dependent on foreign countries to basically to do a swap and to do a mix around. And so gas, we are less reliant on, gas is the one of the things we're not that reliant on Russia for, to my understanding. We're less reliant than other countries are, especially Europe. Europe is super reliant on Russian gas, because Europe is more of a gas infrastructure continent than we are. And so that's kind of how that works into it. And so the LNG facility is obviously a major concern as it is up and running, or it's not. I mean, I know there's a lot of ambiguity. And so but I don't necessarily know the direct consequences of that. But I mean, we are potentially looking at needing increased gas production in the short midterm because of the war in Ukraine. That's not my opinion. I think we can invest in renewable energies to get to now, but unfortunately that building that infrastructure generally takes years. And so I don't know the direct implications for Tacoma, but Tacoma is a direct link in the global fossil fuel chain, because a lot of our fossil fuels will go east. Gas, I think, is a little bit different. I think gas mostly stays in the state, but
Quick
You-
follow-up.
No, we don't have any follow-ups because we have a
I
lot of
wanted to
questions.
ask Annette's take on that.
Yeah, that would be a good follow-up, is to ask Annette to see if she could say something about that.
Fill in my
Yeah.
gaps in knowledge.
Well, I don't know about that, but real quickly, as you were talking about LNG, I do know that we signed some kind of 50-year deal with China to provide LNG. So I can't imagine that these guys aren't going to try to expand. And, in the interim regulations that got approved by the city of Tacoma, they allowed for another 500,000 gallons. I mean, they actually basically made it so that the LNG plant could expand. So I think that they bait and switched us, and I think they're going to open up, and I think they're going to expand, and we'll just try to stop it every step of the way. About the war and what we're using in the war, it's not my area of expertise. I can't speak to that at all, but good questions.
I think the war is all about gas, very much about gas, and we
Well,
are.
Kathy, we have to move on because there are a lot of people, but thank you so much for your question. Let's see, Maru, why hasn't holding PSC accountable for the Tacoma tar pits ever taken hold as threat to those inside the Northwest Detention Center and beyond.
I think that,
Go ahead.
sorry. Yeah, I think that it's easier to see the villain of LNG by itself than all these other players. It's very hard sometimes in our fight to name so many targets, right? So for us, we already have plenty, right? We have Geo, we have ICE, we have Amazon, we have Palantir, now we have the LNG and the company that runs the LNG. But then go beyond that, it's even more difficult sometimes for people to grasp. I think it has to do with what Marilyn was saying, right? To avoid jargon, to make language more simple. That's how we work, because we don't want to assume that people in detention, they all have the same level of education, formal education. I would say formal education because we're all educated. It's just formal education, the Western education, or level of English. You know, we come from different countries. We have different ways of communicating with each other. So we try to always use very simple language. And it is true that the systems make it so complicated, so polluted in itself, that it's so hard for us to sometimes grasp exactly what's going on and who is who and who's in charge of what. And so that's why I think it has been difficult for us to hold it. And I think for us, it's more helpful to name those that are easier to see, and then find ways where we can actually go against those, what we call secondary targets, right? So that's why this conversation today is important for us, because we want to advance our fight against NWDC by joining the environmental justice fight. We want to join what's happening at the port of Tacoma to say we don't want the port to look like this, including it should not have a space for NWDC. The port of Tacoma should fight against NWDC and not have it there anymore. And we should have this land back to the tribes. We should do this, we should do that, but it has to come together. And that's why Resistencia is investing right now time that we don't have. We're all volunteers in Resistencia to learn more about what's going on in Tacoma, especially at the port, but also how do we bring this information to people in detention so they can design the strategy, because remember, our strategy is set by people in detention. So it is our role to try to grasp and digest all of this so we can give it to them in a very, not only easy, but limited way, because we're limited in our communications with people in detention. Geo and I are constantly reading everything we send. They record the conversations that we have with people detained. Last night, one of our members was able to talk to someone in detention at midnight, because this guy was placed in solitary confinement, so he would not organize, because Gio and I are listening on his conversations, and he heard calling us saying, I'm gonna organize, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna fight for this, I'm gonna fight for that. So what they put him in the hall so he doesn't, right? And they didn't give him a phone for a week. So last night at midnight, he calls one of our leaders and they spend like half hour on the phone. So we have limited time. How do we explain these things to him so he can organize as well? So I think it's a very important conversation to have, to understand all of this so we can all come up with ideas of how do we communicate this to our leadership, to our communities, so they themselves decide this is the best strategy to take on.
Thank you so much. I see Marilyn Kimmerling. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
I didn't really have one. I was making a statement about avoiding jargon and technical language, because that really alienates a lot of people and it divides people. And if we really want to reach outside of our own little bubble to change the culture, we need to use common language.
Thank you. And I'm looking at, let's see, there's another, I'm trying to make sure that everybody who's raised their hand or put something in the chat gets an opportunity. I see another good question from Kathy. Is there, and before Kath, don't unmute yet, Kathy, before Kathy unmutes to ask her next question, and it's about PSC being the target. Is there anybody else who hasn't spoken who would like to speak? Please raise your hand or write your question in the chat.
Barb, can you see Pete's hand? Pete Weimer?
No, okay, so Pete, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. And I learned a lot today. I'm just wondering how it baffles me that we have laws to protect our environment. And, I'm just wondering how. And I've heard from tribal experts and other science and experts that that the salmon habitats are going to be the greatest impacted by warmer climates. And they're just going to overheat. And I'm wondering, you know, there's the Medicine Creek Treaty, which is there to, it's a law to support the habitats or their caretaking by the tribe of these salmon habitats. And then we have the Endangered Species Act too. Is there a push to enforce these mandates, or is there support, or can we help support enforcement of these mandates? Because it just seems like that would really do a lot to preserve these critical habitats and also reduce climate change.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I found it really interesting in the fight with the Puget Sound Energy that the federal government, who we have a nexus with because of our treaty, was very clear about the city of Tacoma being the permitting agency and the permitting authority on that site. And because that land was taken from us and we don't hold title to it, even though it's our ancestral homelands, and you know it's disputed in how we lost it, they are upholding the city's laws just as much as they are upholding the tribe's laws on tribal land. So they really give a lot of authority to the permitting jurisdiction. I was really, really disappointed in the federal government for not sticking up to their end of the Medicine Creek Treaty, which they've been doing for, you know, ever since the treaty was signed. And we're used to it. Unfortunately, it's the normal, but it doesn't stop us from fighting. It doesn't stop us from having those conversations. Where we do have clear jurisdiction, those are definitely tools that we can use. And I think changing the policies and the laws at the state and local levels to make them more stringent, and the city and the county and the state, I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic they're doing a better job at consulting with the tribe after this project, and the Port of Tacoma as well. But yeah, I was really disappointed that the federal government didn't step up and help us in any one of the possible, you know, between the Army Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Department of Justice, all of the different places where we could have found relief, we found none.
Well, thank you for your response, and our time is up, and I'm sure you guys have things to do too. But so we have about 10 more minutes in our program, and I want to thank all of our speakers first and foremost. It's such an honor to have you here, and you've taught us so much. And it's important that we continue to network and support each other in our efforts. And also, audience, thank you so much for your great questions and caring about all of these issues. So I'm going to turn it over to Oneida again.
Hi, thank you so much, Barb, for putting this together, and our guests who were here. And I just want to say this, Annette, thank you for filling us in on some of the work that the Thought Tribe has been doing with the government. That was really helpful to me to hear that. So we have some closing remarks actually from Dr. Dexter Gordon, who is the Executive Vice President of Evergreen State College, and really the person who has, for the last, I don't know, almost 20 years, put together or started, he was the inceptor of the conversation in the first place. So Dr. Gordon, are you, I see you there.
I'm very here. Thank you very much, Anita. First, just to acknowledge that On screen with us today are Eve Bowen and Callista Brown. I think Sid Olafs is probably here as well. But these have been standing partners in the almost 2 decades of work that we've done to keep this conversation going, focusing on the issues you've heard us talk about and you've heard others talk about today. Thank you very much, Barb, for your ongoing work linking the conversation with these progressive environmental efforts. I'd like to express my own appreciation to Mauro and La Resistencia for their work and for sharing it with us today. Marquise Mason, the energy you bring to your presentations always just, it's just great. Thank you for your work, and it's great to see you transitioning into this Green New Deal effort. Annette Bryan, thank you for joining us today. I've always been encouraged by any effort I've made over the years to reach out to anyone from the Puyallup tribe. Their responses have been gracious and welcoming, and I've benefited greatly from our participation with them in this land, which is theirs, to which they've welcomed us. I want to just make some comments, some general comments. The first thing I want to note is that, of course, we gather in the shadow of Earth Day. And Earth Day, think about it, where we celebrate this little blue planet that we share. And amidst the struggle for environmental justice and justice for all, we have one more war. And the war, I think, highlights almost all the issues we've talked about. Mauro brought us the question of immigration, and that one is on the front burner. I'll talk about it in a little bit. Then Marquise brought us the question of the environment itself and the economic realities around it as it relates to sustainability. And Annette brought us the question of land and rights and First Nation people and their rights. Immigration. Right now, this minute, in fact, last week, April 14, Thursday, April 14, the UK government and the Rwandan government announced a deal. And in this deal, the UK government agreed to pay the Rwandan government $158 million for what's initially a 5-year agreement for, as they say, housing and integrating of migrants. Rwanda, think and remember, 1994, 800,000 Tutsis and the Hutus who tried to protect them were eliminated in genocide. The British government is announcing this deal to send Africans who are seeking asylum in England back to Africa, to Rwanda in particular, because they do not want them in Britain. At the same time, this same UK government is spending billions of dollars to welcome a different set of refugees. refugees from the Ukraine. If you think about the United States, the picture is almost the exact same. Ukraine refugees were fast-tracked across the southern borders, while those from those southern nations, Haiti, Mexico, Guatemala, the range of nations across the Caribbean and Central America, those people seeking asylum in the United States were sent back, often imprisoned. And so we see a clear double standard on the question of immigration. But there's more. The nations of CARIFTA, that is the Caribbean nations, who organize themselves into a unit, have appealed to Britain to provide reparations for the millions of Africans brought to the Caribbean on European slave ships, and the British, including British royal couple visiting the Caribbean just 2 weeks ago, have refused any application for reparations. And those of us who have followed reparations in the United States know that Representative John Conyers in 1989 introduced a bill not for reparations, but for the study of the proposals for reparations, 1989. And it's just this year, Representative Conyers, at the time when he proposed it, said, he said in 2013, I proposed this bill and I will propose it every year until it's passed. This year, for the first time, there's a report that the bill is moving forward. For almost 40 years, the bill has not come out of committee. And this is a bill that seeks to address something that we know is not denied, and that is Africans brought to the United States have labored without compensation. And in 1860, their value was estimated to be 2.7, or in 2013, their value at the time in 1860 was estimated to be 2.7 billion US dollars. Translated into 2014 dollars, that's $123.8 trillion. One of the arguments made against reparations in the earlier days, back in the 1990s, was that nobody could calculate how much. Well, now the calculations have been clear. So the issue of immigration, the issue of economics, and now the question of land. When the efforts were advanced to end slavery, there were two questions that slaveholders had in opposing the efforts. Question number one, economics. Who is going to pay us for the loss of our property? And question number two, land and belonging rights. Where are these people going to go? Those questions remain with us for Black and brown people and poor people across the world. Where are they going to go? And who is going to provide for their economic well-being? We know that the money is available. We know because here we see Britain willing to step up to pay because they do not want these asylum seekers from Africa. We know because we see the United States able to pay trillions of dollars now to support the Ukraine. And I want to make this very plain that I strongly support the welcoming of refugees from the Ukraine. Strongly support. My argument is that kind of support ought to be offered to any group of people fleeing for their lives and seeking a better life. Environmental justice, which emerged full-blown in the 1960s out on the backs of the civil rights and anti-war protests, should be connected in a way that we argue justice for all. That's why my 3 words today. So environmental justice, economic justice, racial justice, justice for refugees, justice for displaced people, justice for the earth, justice for native people, justice for everyone and anyone who seeks to share this little blue planet as we celebrate Earth Day. Thank you.